In Sun Hollow, the village where the golden glow covered the earth and the sun rose and set across the sky, the slightest darkness was prized. Phoebus never provided shade, but a young weaver of the loom called Elara saw beauty in light's absence. Elara toiled in her small but cozy home, in which only bundles of thread and rolls of fine cloths were possible in this world. Both her hands were supple, and she wove beautiful pieces, which looked as though they have life and substance. But the unique talent that made her work stand out was what few knew. She knew how to incorporate the shadows into the creations she sewed, falling into the darkness. The play between light and darkness that makes people's hearts skip a beat when looking at her pieces. That is why the people of Sun Hollow gazed at her larger tapestries with some degree of foolishness and mystery in the wrinkles of their fibers. This is why it wasn't a big surprise when they grew wondrous as they asked her, "How do you do it, Elara?" Elara would just smile and say, "I just see the shadows in my heart and create them." However, shadow weaving that Elara had was not simply a talent. It was a talent her family had been passing through generations. Her grandmother had, and narrated to her of the influential enchantment which flowed in their lineage, the ability to summon shadow and form them. "Be careful, Elara," her grandmother had advised her before her mother had cut her off from all her friends. "For shadows are not mere negations. No, they are something. They are. They contain the unknown, and some things are best unknown." Late one day, as Elara was about to complete a large piece of cloth known as tapestry, she realized the strangest of things. The likes she had woven start to entice, stirring within the folds of fabric. She felt her heart flutter when the shadow on the tapestry extended, lifts up from the material like the smoke. Then a figure began to be exploring. Before her was a vague outline of a man, barely visible, a man that was encased in the darkness, with two sinister glowing eyes staring right through her. "Elara," it said out loud in a hiss that was as melded to the air as a specter's breath was to cold. "You have summoned me." She could hardly allow herself to be killed, but the urge to investigate trumped her, and she was seized with fear. "Who? What are you?" The shadow's eyes gleamed. "I am the Weaver of Shadows, an Etherian who is attached unto those that possess the gift. With your weaving you have called me, now we are connected." He was so close now, she could feel the heat coming off him. Elara realized that she was sweating as well. "Oh, I didn't trying to call out for anyone." "But you have," the shadow answered. "I have treated her and her calendar better than anyone has in the beauty. And now I offer you a choice. Sun Hollow cannot even imagine the kind of shadows you can make with my assistance, more powerful shadows that this place has ever seen. All the work you do will be admired and your name will remain forever in the annals of history." The thought was tempting. Her art had always received reaction, but the task to make a legendary item excited her. She hesitated. "What do you want in return?" The smile was thin and dark, echoing the color of the shadow. "When weaving, you lose a piece of your shadow, only a little of it every time, but still it makes a difference. The more he draws, the more intimately connected we will be." Elara recalled her grandmother's words, but the idea of such power and rich recognition wasn't too difficult to decline. She nodded, and the shadow disappeared back into the tapestry, making her feel just a little less full somehow. Later on, within the next days, the art of Elara became the topic of village gossip. Many people thronged her galleries to get an eyeful of her artistic prowess and the density of the work amidst shadows she presented. Her had been more than simple outlines. The shadows in them seemed to move, and there was the impression that there was life within the tapestries. But what she was doing at each of them was making her weaker and weaker with every single tapestry. She grew weak, and her eyes were lifeless, and an inexplicable hollowness resided in her chest. She knew that every object left her a little less of herself. She was losing her own reflection with each work she did. One day there came a small child from the village, and, staring at the pieces of tapestries, said to her, "Miss Elara," he said in such a simple and childlike manner, "why do you frown whenever your creations are so lovely?" Elara cowered over the child, a sudden sharp pin pulling at her heart. She had become a celebrity, but what of it had she received in return? Every painting was taking her further away from herself, and she was okay with it because it was essentially who she was now. She was losing her own light. Finally, one night, stopped motionless at the side of Lysander's bed, Elara knew that she could not carry on anymore. In the recent past, she worked in a small, dingy room. Now she sat in her workshop, gazing at the last piece she had weaved. That shadow inside appeared to move, twisting its fingers right before her. Taking all her bravery, she ordered the Weaver of Shadows, and suddenly the shadow emerged, and it is even bigger and more imposing than before. "Are you ready to accept a place by my side, Elara?" it intoned, there being an undertone of glee in that voice of his. "No," Elara said calmly, responding to the question put to her. "I want my shadow back. I want my light back." The Weaver's smile vanished. "Once you get into the shadows, you can hardly escape it." But Elara had a plan. She grabbed a pair of silver scissors, handed down from her grandmother and entrusted to her. "These shears are for cutting thread," her grandmother had said, "but they cut more than fabric if you are brave." Elara extended her hands and, also shaking, cut the shears in order to destroy the shadow figure which she had created on the tapestry. The shadow screamed again, and its silhouette dispersed like the smoke. "What are you doing?" demanded the shadow fiercely. "I have my shadow, I have my light," Elara answered, rising her tone to a triumphant level. She scratched and ripped until the tapestry was ruined, although each piece she shredded dispersed into black ash. When the very last string was pulled onto which she had been ensnared, the Weaver of Shadows disintegrated, all of its power over her erased. This time, Elara discovered she felt a heat emerging in segments of her body, or rather, emitted a warmth she hadn't in a long time. Her shadow was hers once more. Her shadow was hers once more. For the remaining days, Elara went back to weaving. But it is important to know that the tapestries were not the same. They no longer possessed the awkward, moving silhouettes, but they glowed with invited energy and love that filled her creations and went into them. This the villagers did, and even though on this new direction, the coloration on the new tapestries was not dark and mysterious in some ways, they were even more beautiful, for they were full of peace and joy. The girl remembered the words of her grandmother, exactly as she was told on that day. She knew that art could be potent, but only cardinal beauty emanated from the interplay of the light side of the blackness as well as the dark side of the light in taming the heart's maker.